Volunteer and Engagement Outreach Manager. Outreach and Volunteer Engagement Manager at Reestablish Richmond, and we are so happy to have him. He is presenting on Reestablish Richmond and then leading a panel for us, interfaith panel. So thank you, Will.
Thank you. All right, we're doing a double microphone because this is going to the internet people, and this is going to you all. So that's what's going on here. So internet people, hello. I don't know, in the interwebs, good afternoon. To real, well, they're real people too, but to the people here in the room, good afternoon. It is good to be with you all. As Deborah said, my name is Will Cumbia. I am the Outreach and Volunteer Engagement Manager with Reestablish Richmond, and it's a joy to be here with you all today. So we're talking a little bit about the context of newcomers in the greater Richmond area. What are some of the realities for newcomers in our current moment? And also, what does it look like from an organizational standpoint, supporting newcomers on their journeys towards self-sufficiency? To start at a high-level context, just for a second, I'm gonna start at the highest level, and then we're gonna zoom right in on to Richmond from there. Just to look at the numbers across the world. So at the end of 2024, according to the UNHCR, there were 123 million folks who were forcibly displaced across the world. That is a number that has only increased in the past few years. It's a staggering number. It is a conglomerate number. So forcibly displaced from the UN, this is a number that is a couple of different numbers grouped together. This includes internally displaced folks, so folks who are forced out of their homes but are still within their home country, and then folks who are outside of their country as well. I do believe that there are metrics for measuring this. Some of this is kind of refugee and war displacement. I do believe that the UNHCR is beginning to look at climate displacement in some of its data and looking at numbers of displacement. But this is a staggering number, and it's hard to imagine what this means. But to put it into context, in the US, that is as if the 5 most populous US states, everyone in those states all had to leave. So everyone in New York, Pennsylvania, Florida, Texas, and California, everyone in those states all had to leave their homes. So it's a staggering number. It's not going down anytime soon. And it's unfortunately the reality that we're looking at. On the right-hand side of the screen, you can see the countries where the most displacement folks were coming from. This is updated as the end of 2024, and so previously Syria was the number one. This is not a fun competition that folks are running up against each other. But Sudan is now number 1 in terms of displacement. Syria is still at number 2, despite the developments that have happened in Syria in the past year. Afghanistan is still very high, Ukraine very high, and Colombia was not on the top 5 earlier in 2024 and at the end of 2023, and now Colombia is now up on that list as well. If we zoom in on our context here in the US, looking at immigration and kind of those who are from a foreign-born context, those who are living in Virginia who have been born outside of the US. Sorry, this is across the U.S. in total. You can see the number of immigrants has more than tripled since 1970, and the percentage has gone up as well. If you look, the orange line is the percentage of the U.S. population in comparison as well. If we look at the Richmond area, as of the 2020 census, 12.6 of the Richmond the Virginia population were from a foreign-born background, born outside of the U.S. We use school data because often the schools have some of the best data to talk about what is happening at home, just because it's a little bit harder to nail down adults to understand the context we're in. But schools obviously have quite good data, and so Richmond continues to be a growing center of newcomer communities. 1 in 10 folks in the greater Richmond metro area are foreign-born, meaning 155,000 residents in the greater metro area speak languages other than English at home. And the numbers of that speak, there are over 139 different languages that are spoken at home in the greater Richmond area of school-age kids. In Richmond, that's about at 20%, so a little bit higher, but Henrico is still at 14% as well. We don't have the numbers for Chesterfield or Hanover, but those are the numbers for Richmond and Henrico. If we look a little bit more about the context locally of who we are working with as Reestablish Richmond, our populations that we historically have been working with have been Afghans in majority, 66% in 2024. And that has been pretty consistent over the last few years in terms of the main group that we are working with are Afghans. And within that, the majority of those clients are Afghan women that we are working with as well. You can see it's a little bit small on the screen to see some of the other folks, but from the DRC, from Ukraine, Guatemala, Sudan, and then 20% from other countries. And that is representative. We have folks from other Central and Latin American backgrounds. We have folks from the Middle East. We have folks from West and East Africa. We have folks from Southeast Asia. Everyone is here in Richmond, which is a beautiful thing. And there are a lot of ways a lot of gaps in that that folks need as well. On the right side of the screen, you can see resettlement numbers in Virginia. So this is the number of resettled refugees who have come into the greater Richmond area. You can see that has fluxed greatly over time. You might note the dates on the left-hand side coincide with a certain first presidential administration, and the ones as you go down further coincide with the second presidential administration. So these numbers, particularly the refugee cap, is set at the federal level, and so the number of folks who are able to come into Virginia is somewhat controlled based off of at the federal level. In the darker green, you can see the numbers across Virginia, and in the lighter green is in the greater Richmond area as well. Now, we were on track in the fiscal year 2025, which will go through October of this year. We were on track prior to January to resettle close to 800 folks, which is a little bit higher than it was in 2024. January 20th, obviously everything got shut down, but I do think that there were still close to 500, if not over 500 folks who had already made it in before January 20th. So still relatively recently, we've had a decent number of newcomers, particularly from the refugee resettlement pipeline, come into the greater Richmond area. Looking at some of what the current context is. Since the new presidential administration, resettlement agencies have been significantly pushed back. The two main players in the greater Richmond area, we have the International Rescue Committee, IRC, and then CCC, Commonwealth Catholic Charities. CCC has effectively cut or furloughed the majority of their resettlement staff. So they are not very involved in resettlement work that's going on. The IRC has had to furlough some of their staff, but they still have some operating staff members when it comes to their resettlement program. But the reality is the global pipeline has been completely shut down. So, and shut down meaning like full stop, nothing. We're gonna work through the cases of who already was approved. It was a complete stop. So there are instances and cases of families who were booked on two different flights, one on January 19th, the other on January 20th. The ones on the 19th made it to the U.S., the ones on the 20th did not. There have been cases of minors left in spaces outside of the U.S. So what that means now where we are, even if they were to reopen that pipeline, there are also a great number of contracts that were canceled to facilitate the movement of people within that pipeline. So even if they have said, technically, if you have been approved to enter the U.S., if you have a visa to come to the U.S., you can come, but there's no support to get here. Which prior to that, there had been support in terms of promises of helping with book travel, doing a medical evaluation, and some other things as well, in addition to what folks are promised once they have arrived here. Now they've said, you can still come if you want to, but you have to do it on your own. So unless for a family of 4 is sitting on $5,000 to $10,000, maybe even more $1,000, then you're stuck, and there's not much that you can do. I will say that still, the IRC is still accepting walk-ins here in the greater Richmond area. So if there are folks who have come, but for whatever reason we're not immediately working with the resettlement agency, the IRC is still functional, and they still have services that they're able to offer for walk-ins or for folks who are more recently arrived. Of course, there are knock-on effects of this as well, and what comes from that. For newcomer populations themselves, there's a lot of anxiety and fear around status. What we've seen so far is that in a lot of Latino communities, as we talked about last night, there's a lot more heavy in terms of anxiety and fear. Within folks who are in the refugee resettlement kind of process, at the moment, folks are on a little bit more of fixed or permanent status that are on track towards citizenship eventually. However, all of that is at the whim of a government agency at some point. And so we've seen things like temporary protected status, humanitarian parolee. A lot of statuses that were quite secure prior to January 20th are now much less secure or have been canceled or rolled back. So there is a lot of uncertainty. What we've also seen is that for a lot of newcomer populations, as with all of us, actually, our media spheres and how we gain information there's these little bubbles. And for a lot of newcomer communities, it's not necessarily going to mainstream or even secondary news resources. A lot of it is shared internally within smaller kind of community groups. So WhatsApp groups, Telegram groups, seeing things maybe just from their Facebook friends. And so what we saw very early on in the administration was a lot of stories that were partially true or not true at all that somebody saw and got scared about and shared and then continued to share. And so particularly in Latino populations, there was a lot of misinformation that was going around, and that we saw also true within some of our Afghan and other communities that we're working with. At that time, at the very beginning, the official line was, you don't necessarily need to be so scared. ICE doesn't have the capabilities, all of these government agencies that are going to do any of this work of deportation or status revocation or anything like that. They don't have the resources to be able to do that. Unfortunately, that is becoming no longer the case with the recent bill that was passed and the exorbitant amount of money that is now going into kind of the whole deportation system. So it's not looking like it's getting any better necessarily, and there still is a lot of anxiety and fear around what status looks like and how folks can be here. Of course, other programs that are being cut, other government programs, in those cuts, a lot of newcomers are qualified for government programs, for SNAP, for Medicaid, Medicare, and so with those program cuts also come other challenges as well, particularly economic impact. Family reunification issues, right? The ability for folks to be reunified with their family, and have, as I said, families that were separated, or a lot of families move in stages, right? So they'll send one or two family members ahead to get secure status and get settled, to start to work money, to work a job, pay money back into the system so that the rest of the family can eventually come. And so any Afghan family in the region, if you talk to, if you ask them, where is your family? Some of them are still in Afghanistan. Some of them are in Pakistan. Some of them are in Europe. Some of them are in Brazil. And all of those are somewhere along the path of folks that are eventually hoping to be reunified in the U.S. And so all of this disrupts that system, and also the right for family reunification as well. And then, of course, economic impacts, tariffs, everything, the cost of living, anything that we are feeling, newcomer communities are also feeling as well. So that's the current context that we are working within. And that gets to us. I'm realizing that I probably should have put this slide first to say, who are we? But you get the context first, and then you see why we're important within that context. Reestablish Richmond, our mission is to connect refugees and new immigrants to the resources they need to establish roots, build community, and to become self-sufficient. So about 10 to 13 years ago, we were founded intentionally. We were actually founded out of a ministry of a Baptist church in town, out of Tabernacle Baptist Church. And that we intentionally were founded as a non-religious nonprofit to fill gaps within the refugee resettlement landscape. At that point, there were huge gaps, particularly in housing for newcomers that were coming. And so we wanted to try and fill gaps within that. And what we've been able to do over time is to be flexible and malleable to be able to figure out what are the different areas and gaps that are within the refugee resettlement landscape. And then later we have we changed our mission statement a few years ago to be more broadly for all new immigrants that might need access to our services, since there are so many overlaps in the needs and the gaps for refugees and for new immigrants, and very often the gaps are even wider for new immigrants, particularly those in kind of differing documentation status. So we have evolved over time. Our programming has changed. I'll go into a little bit of what that looks like. But our goal is not to replicate or reinvent the wheel in the community, but to figure out what are the resources that do exist for newcomers and why are newcomers not able to access those resources. So I'll go into what some of those reasons are here in a second. But looking at bridging those gaps in the process so that folks can become self-sufficient on their own. We are very much not we are trying to build healthy helping relationships. We are not trying to make sure that folks are reliant on us for years and decades to come. Our goal is for folks to be able to get on their feet and to achieve their own goals on their own. What we've done over those 10 years, we've built up a lot of trusted community. We've built that up within newcomer communities, have strong relationships with a lot of newcomer communities and leaders within those communities. We have built up, having been formed in a faith community, we have an entire network of faith groups that we are working with, and we absolutely believe in the power of faith communities as being some of the chief engines of welcome in our community. We also work with different government organizations, and we have good relationships with other agencies and providers within this landscape. And so we kind of sit at the center of this web, doing our best to connect the dots along the way. Being a small nonprofit has a lot of drawbacks. 2 years ago, we were in process for applying for a federal grant, and we were really excited. It was almost going to come. It was going to revolutionize how we did our work in terms of the amount of influx of cash that was going to come, and we didn't get it. We were super bummed. And now, at this point, we say thank God, because the strings attached to it and everything that would have happened. So being small and being primarily grassroots funded and kind of smaller grants and foundation funded means that we are extremely flexible so that we can pivot when we need to. So during COVID, we pivoted completely to change our programming to what the needs were. During the Afghan evacuation in 2021, we pivoted our programming to be flexible to what the needs are. And right now, we are finding ourselves, this is kind of our moment where yet again, things are a dumpster fire and we have a fire extinguisher that we know how to use. And so we are very proud and intentional about being very locally sourced and flexible within that. And then the other thing that we pride ourselves is being very client-centered. So our entire program area is built off of what are newcomers coming to us and saying, I need this. Can you help me with this? We are not saying, all right, great, here's what you need, we're going to give it to you. We are saying, this is what we are offering that has been built in partnership with you. Come and let's work together towards your goals. Some of the big gaps that we have seen, and that some of these will be a surprise, other things might be new for you. But some of the biggest gaps that newcomers are facing that we look to address: language access and cultural barriers. Folks who are coming, particularly in the refugee resettlement process, a lot of the Afghans that we're working with might be SIV holders, special immigrant visas, which means they had worked with the U.S. government or the U.S. military in some capacity. And that might mean that dad of a family worked for a contracting company that built some of the fences for a U.S. Installment in Afghanistan. So kind of sort of contractor work that his level of education might not be super high, and certainly his spouse and his kids might not have access to language as well. All the way up to, we have worked with engineers and accountants and others who have worked within that. So what that means is there is a wide variety of language skills that folks are coming with, and a lot of gaps that they're working within that. Even if you are fluent in English before you come to the United States, you are not fluent in English American culture. And I think all of us, none of us are fluent in American culture, because I might be I'm not fluent in Richmond culture. There's many things that I walk out and I don't know what the possum means, and there's all sorts of other things in Richmond that I am still learning as a relative newcomer to Richmond. But I drive, 2 hours in any sort of direction, and I'm not as culturally fluent. So that's me as someone born and raised longtime Virginian. So cultural barriers are a huge area. Transportation access is one of the main areas that we have been championing over the past few years. A lot of it comes with language access at the DMV, helping folks understand there is a bus system. It technically works. We can show you how to use it. Usually how we do bus orientations, we say, probably it's going to take 3 hours. Plan for 5. We're going to take you and do a route 1 or 2 times to see how it goes. And almost always at the end of it, the client says, thank you so much. That's not going to work. I don't have that amount of time. I don't know. This is going to be too complicated to navigate. And where I'm living and where I'm trying to go for work or for school or for whatever is not accessible to me. So we do a lot of work around driver's license and other things around that I'll talk more about in a second. Employment and education access. Folks, the gap of I was an engineer in Afghanistan and now I want to be an engineer here, and there is a whole slew of different things and hoops you have to jump through to even get to a starting point of maybe an intern or a very entry-level job in an engineering firm, not anywhere close to where you were equatable. All the way down to folks are having to work for the first time in their lives because it is very difficult to live on a single income in this country. And so for a lot of women in particular who had not had to work and whose primary sphere of work was in the home is now having to get at least a part-time job, if not a full-time job, to support the family here. And so there's a steep learning curve when it comes to employment, and also with education access, right? A lot of jobs require different levels of education that are not necessarily the same from kind of home countries for folks. And then another area, just lack of connections, right? If you think about what work you are doing right now, you can think of maybe the direct connections of, oh, well, I knew so-and-so and he or she helped me get this connection to this job. But all of the networks that help you to get to all of those different things. What does it mean that you had the networks to even where you lived, and then where you got to go to school, and then so on and so forth? If you are starting from ground zero, then it takes a long time to build up that, particularly as you are facing all of these other barriers all at the same time. We've got a link here, and I'm happy to share it afterwards. I don't know if there will be a thing that will go out to people afterwards, probably. But we were a part of a regional strategy and kind of vision casting a few years ago that looked at what were the barriers that newcomers were facing in our region. And what are the different service providers that are working within those different areas. And what was neat about that is we ended up being kind of at the center of this big spider web. There are a lot of organizations that do 1 or 2 things, kind of had one spoke off of, but the amount of connectivity that we had, as well as the different services that we provide, meant that we kind of sat at the middle of this hub. And that is something that we are looking more intentionally over the next few years. What does it mean to be kind of a regional hub around welcome in the greater Richmond area? So what do we do looking at these kind of gaps that folks are facing? We have 3 different teams within our organization. We have our operations team that helps keep the lights on and help us keep funded to do our work. We have our outreach team. We've done a lot of, increasingly over the past few years, done a lot of community education, events like this, going into churches, going into corporate settings to do kind of orientations and understandings of who are newcomers, what are the realities that they're facing. And we also have a robust volunteer engagement team that I'll talk a little bit more about in a second, of volunteer opportunities. And then the bulk of our work is happening in our client engagement side. We divide it up into 2 different sections. We have our one-to-one support, which is our newcomer navigation support, and then our group support, newcomer education. Under newcomer navigation, some of the main areas that we are addressing, we've got English language support. So we match volunteers for 6 months for doing one-to-one English tutoring for folks, helping folks work on their specific goals in English, not necessarily in a class setting. We have employment navigation. We have an employment navigation coach on staff that is doing everything from let's help you rewrite your CV into an American resume and see what happens from there, all the way up to, all right, you're an engineer. Who do we know that are engineers? Let's see if we can get you a connection with them, do an informational interview, and see what happens from there. Transportation independence, as I said, is one of our biggest areas. We have a very strong partnership with Henrico County and their VIEW program, helping get folks matched into driving schools in Henrico, which has been huge, and we are so grateful for that partnership, as well as helping folks go to the DMV and navigate the DMV, understand what their rights are at the DMV, and how to best navigate that. And then on a limited basis, we're doing some other resource navigation as well around digital literacy, financial literacy, citizenship support, and also health and wellness, understanding what benefits are folks able to have access to out and about. And then our newcomer education side of things, our group supports. We have group English classes that we run. This is one of the few areas that we duplicate services. Employment navigation is another one of those areas. There will never be enough employment coaches for newcomers. There will never be enough English classes for newcomers. As long as our current system, as long as the government is not providing English classes, we will not ever have enough English classes. But what is distinctive about a lot of our group programming is that we provide childcare and transportation for any client that requests it. So it is wonderful if there is a church that's a mile and a half down the road from where I live and they have an English class. But it is at 7 o'clock at night. I have 3 kids under the age of 5. I don't have a car. There is not a sidewalk to be able to walk there. And if I wanted to at night with my 3 kids, or however many kids I just said I had. Anyways, the point being that there are resources available, but there are still barriers sometimes even to access those resources. And so by providing transportation for clients that need it and childcare at our English classes, we have one of the most, our attrition rate for folks who stay in class is like 40% higher than the national average. I think our attrition rate is above 85% for most of our classes, which for newcomer English classes is brilliant. And part of that is because we provide transportation and childcare for those that need it. We also have 2 levels of sewing classes that we offer, which are part economic empowerment, part community building. The first level is kind of for at-home basic sewing skills. The second level is for folks who want to work professionally in kind of sewing environment. So we have folks that are working at David's Bridal and other kind of tailoring shops around town. And then usually once a year, we do one other group class focused on something else that's needed. Usually it's around health and wellness. This past summer, we sponsored some swim classes in partnership with St. Catherine's School and have done other things around there as well. So just want to say we are always open to different connections. So if you know of folks that might want to fund this sort of work, then absolutely you are welcome to come and talk to me afterwards. If you know folks that are looking for volunteer opportunities, tangible opportunities to get involved and support newcomers in the community, our biggest area of need right now is for daytime drivers who can help pick up clients and get them to English class and back home. But we have other volunteer opportunities as well. We also have, there are spokespeople. I have plants in the audience. We have some former current volunteers and some former AmeriCorps members as well. There are other folks that you can talk to in the room about volunteering with us and spreading the word, spreading awareness. I think you all are doing that a lot already. But letting folks know that if they're interested in doing work with newcomers, that we are one of a touch points. If that's with your faith community, we'd be happy to do that. We partner with a lot of faith communities in the region and are looking to more intentionally do faith community partnership there as well. There's one more thing I wanted to say with that, and I'm forgetting now. I have more information. I've got our table set up, and I'm happy to talk with you afterwards if you have any questions. You can also sign up for a newsletter there. That's what I was going to say. You can see from kind of the populations that we work with that it is a lot of Afghans and others who have come kind of through the refugee resettlement process. Obviously, a lot of the needs and a lot of the areas of need we're seeing are with Latino communities. We do have some clients who are Latino, but again, majority kind of because of our relationships and history is on the other side. However, we have a lot of really strong partnerships with other organizations in the region. And so if you are also looking, if you say, I want to volunteer in this area, or I want to get involved in this area, but Latino populations is where my heart is, then let me know. We have a list of kind of trusted partners that are doing work in the region, and there are an abundance of volunteer needs in that area as well. I would love for you to come volunteer with us, but I would rather, if you are not going to volunteer with us, I want you to volunteer and be engaged somewhere else as well. All right. That is all from me. I'm forgetting, do I have a question time, or are we going right into the panel right now? We do have question time. Okay. What time do we need to start the panel? At 3? 3:30. Okay. Got it. Okay. Cool. So we do have time for a few questions from me before I invite our panelists up, and we're going to engage in a lovely little interfaith conversation. Any questions or clarifying points from anyone? I guess this is
I will be loud. Well, not to those who are on the screen, but thank you for doing this work and for also informing us about this. The first comment is, do you take anyone to the DMV? Because I would like to get some help with the DMV. But this one aside, clearly many of the people that you support and help reestablish in this context have gone through many traumatic experiences. I'm convinced that any migration involves trauma, but clearly those who have witnessed a civil war or the like, or an invasion, they come with a lot of trauma. So I wonder if Reestablish does any work towards counseling, trauma healing, familial, the impact of trauma on the life of the family itself.
Thank you. That is an excellent question. So yeah, and particularly when you look at, and I meant to mention this at the very beginning, of that number of folks that are displaced compared to the number of folks that have applied to be a refugee in the United States or somewhere in the world, the number that actually come and are resettled here in the U.S. is minuscule. It's less than 1%. So the folks who have made it through that process certainly have experienced trauma, because need and is the highest marker on that. Of course, with a lot of Afghans, there's a little bit of a different system in terms of their relation with the U.S. government. But again, we assume trauma, unless otherwise proven. And so we try and make all of our work trauma informed, and we try and do our best to integrate that also into training volunteers as well, understanding what are some of the signs of trauma, and also not saying that they have to deal with the trauma, but how can we understand, how is this affecting their learning, right? You've taught the same lesson 4 weeks in a row. Why is it not sticking? Well, trauma can do that to your brain, right, among other things. So we try to have a kind of a holistic trauma-informed approach. We have done some specific group programming before, because we found, when it comes to recognition of trauma and also just mental health in general, there's so many culturally contrived pieces, and understanding how do you process that, right? And for a lot of folks, it's very communal. So we did, for that health and wellness kind of piece, there were a few years that we did some intentional kind of support group folks. I believe there was one summer we did an emotional support group for Sudanese women. I think we've done for Afghan women as well. That Hila sewing course is focused on skills, but one of the byproducts of that is community as well, and kind of building in pieces of community. So it is not something that we so directly do and say we have trauma counselors and we do this X, Y, and Z, but it's something that we try and kind of infuse as much as possible. And then we also do signpost to other resources for folks that we see as kind of truly or super high need, or working with other partners to say, okay, yeah, there's something happening at school. What's happening at home? How can we do our best to kind of navigate within that? So yes, but it is not probably one of the areas that is kind of our main point of work, I guess, if that makes sense. Yeah. Yes.
Thank you again. My question has to deal with going along the Hila sewing. Is that the only, I guess you would call skill trade that you have been focused on? And are there other more like integrated into cultural type things that you would look at supplying and supporting people with?
Can you clarify?
So, well, I would just, out of curiosity, what other areas would you look to partner with to help them navigate the landscape?
Sure. Yeah, so the Gila program is one of the main areas of kind of economic empowerment that we've done. The IRC has a pretty decent economic empowerment program specifically that they're working on, so we sometimes refer folks there. The International Rescue Committee, which is one of the resettlement organizations that's still working in the area. Our founder actually also founded a company called Global Painting, where I don't know if you've heard of it or not, but anyways, employing newcomers to do professional painting services. And so they're still working. We sometimes refer folks to work with Patrick. So that's some of the most direct things that we've done. Some of the other areas that we have lightly been in support of is kind of how we work with contractors. So we have contract childcare workers that are usually on site to support, as well as a lot of contract interpreters that we work with. And so those would be the other two areas. For a lot of women, might not have a lot of experience working outside of the home, but have a lot of experience in childcare. And so a lot of it is legitimatizing skills that folks already have, right, to be able to put it on a resume. And so the childcare kind of contractor, and we've done a little bit of professional development work with our contract childcare workers, and then interpreters as well as the other kind of low-hanging fruits of folks once their English is at a high enough level that they're able to help with interpretation and kind of help mediate between those. So those are kind of some of the smaller areas. There's a lot of other areas that I think we would be very open to get into, but the capacity of that and running a job training program takes a lot of capacity, a lot of resources. But thankfully, what's come from the outside of that means that we've had a lot of really cool intentional partnerships with businesses and other folks around. I mean, we've had conversations with folks at Altria because we've referred a lot of folks there. We've had folks. One of our biggest supporters, which is so funny to me, is a company called Super Radiator Coils that makes super radiator coils. That's what they do. So not at all related to, it's just a very manufacturer job, but their entire plant is almost all newcomers, and they have an incredible program, an incredible ethic of welcome within there. And they've been financially supportive of us. We did an English class in partnership with them, and they're incredible people. And so we've seen creative ways that we're able to do kind of a soft side to that as well, if that answers your question. Sure. Yep. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. So the question was, or saying that with the healthcare industry. So two things within that. We have done some partnership with VCU Health. And the other thing that we do is we help with credential evaluation. So folks that, and actually we've been a part of, as well as some partners in encouraging folks who have doctorates, getting those certified and translated over into documentation here, and seeing what are the fast track opportunities to. You might have to take a few classes, but you don't have to reinvent the whole thing. So yeah, we're working with that as well. There's still more work to be done, but there is good work happening around that. Probably one more question here before we get into our panel time. Any questions on a general level? Go for it, Ben.
Curious to know, I worked with unhoused families for a while, and we had a self-sufficiency matrix that we would use. I'm kind of curious to drill down and understand more the ideal sort of end state of, what does self-sufficiency look like, or what are some of the markers that you would say this is what a success story might look like?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, and would be intrigued to look at that matrix and kind of see, because that's something. Someone from our client engagement team could probably answer the semantic question on that a little bit. So I'm happy to refer to there. But I think self-sufficiency, we let our clients define that in some ways, because it's going to look different for a lot of different folks. Self-sufficiency for, we might have a metric of, okay, well, we want from this program of employment navigation that they get a full-time job at the end of it. But actually, some folks might only want a part-time job because of the flexibility that it offers with working, having kids and other things around that. So we also, self-sufficiency is, and you could probably, I don't want to mansplain self-sufficiency, but it's a moving target for a lot of folks. And so a lot of folks, there's levels of self-sufficiency of like, all right, we have enough to pay our rent this month. Is that self-sufficiency? And in some way, yes, that's a good step in self-sufficiency, but maybe we'd like to get up to the next level. And so we are seeing folks at different points in their journey, right? We might have folks that are, right now they're working at Walmart, they're actually getting paid okay, they're doing okay, but they want to move up to whatever the next thing is, and we look at that. We have other folks that want to work at Walmart and need to help to move them towards that. And so it is a bit of a moving target, but I would be intrigued to hear more about how you all look at that, and to also talk with I don't know if we've looked at that with our client engagement team to say within each program area, we have different metrics of our employment navigation coach has an understanding of what does success look like in this particular match, and so on and so forth. But we're always looking to improve as well, and that sounds like a cool matrix. So yeah, let me know. All right, great questions. I'm going to invite Marilyn and Alia to please join me here at the front. We're going to move into a panelette, I will call it, discussion. And I'm very sorry, one of our panelists, Lisa, was going to join us, but she has a stomach bug, and so she was not able to make it. Lisa is a reverend in the, sit wherever you like, is a reverend in... maybe if you go there, I'll sit here. Yeah, in at Good Shepherd United Methodist Church in town, and so she was not able to make it. So I'm hoping that we have some Presbyterian perspectives that are brought in from you all, and I am painfully Baptist, so I can talk Baptist all day long on Baptist perspectives as well. So all right, so please welcome our panelists to the front.
Marilyn, go ahead, please. Okay, my name is Marilyn Breslow, and I am the former Director of Refugee and Immigration Services at the Catholic Diocese of Richmond. But I was the only Jew at the Catholic Diocese of Richmond. So I guess I could say I have two faith communities, because I worked for the diocese for like 35 years. And refugee resettlement was my career and my energy source for all those many years. And my congregation is Orami on Huguenot Road, and it's a fairly small Reformed Jewish congregation, but we've done a lot of work. Inspired by my background, but also inspired by being part of the diocese. So I get to bring both perspectives.
Excellent. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Aliyah Farouk. I'm a member of the Islamic Center of Virginia. I also have the privilege to be the chairperson for the Refugee Committee at the Islamic Center of Virginia. A little bit about myself. I was born and raised, well, I was born in DC, raised in Maryland. I moved to the Richmond area about almost 30 years ago. When I first got here, I became very involved with the Islamic school. I have 4 children, and they all attended the school, which was initially housed at the Islamic Center. And once my kids kind of got out of that elementary school phase, I kind of also shifted gears. And one of the things I noticed was that when I would go to the Islamic Center for Quran study classes, I would notice that we would have a group of women, anywhere from 5 to 10 women who would kind of be meeting on the side, and they would be talking about refugee needs and exchanging money and donations and just kind of working on this project, and I really admired that. I didn't have any experience with them, so I kind of asked them if I could get involved, and very quickly I realized that there was a language barrier that I personally had difficulty dealing with, so I thought maybe I could be more supportive in a different role. And I also felt that all this good work was being done, but really the Islamic Center didn't know about it, and the greater Richmond community probably didn't know about it either, because they were just individual people doing this work. So I went to the women and I said, hey, why don't we get organized? Why don't we create a group under the umbrella of the Islamic Center of Virginia? And we'll probably get some support from them as well. And we'll just document everything we're doing and maybe organize this effort a bit more. And their answer was absolutely not. We're not gonna, we have a system, we're gonna keep on going with it. We don't need to be under the umbrella of the Islamic Center, and we don't want to be micromanaged by the board at the Islamic Center. So it took a little convincing, but they did agree eventually, and the goal was that we would stick with them, with the Islamic Center, as long as they wouldn't micromanage, and here we are almost a decade later. I'm still the chair, they're still doing all the work, I get to be a part of events like this. So I guess it worked out in a sense. I feel like I'm doing something in the right direction. So that's kind of how we were formed. So that gives you a little bit of background on that as well. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So this next question each of you could lead a whole session on this, and you can do an entire semester of questioning about that. But looking at from your particular faith tradition, what stands out to you as some of the main views or values when it comes to work alongside newcomers? Where do you see that drawn from your faith tradition? What are the foundations of that? Either from a holy book or from a practice that you see what newcomer work looks like as a value within each of your faith traditions.
Would you like to take that?
Sure. Well, from my experience, most of the Jewish community is a more recent immigrant community. I'm sure it's the same with the Muslim community. So it's not like it's a distant concept. We have a lot of either parents or grandparents who struggle with being an immigrant, and also not being wanted, the lack of welcome, but then again, the resourcefulness and how communities came together and helped one another. When I moved to Richmond, I heard about somebody's name was, I don't know, Stuart Levy III, and I'm going, what? We never had numbers behind names, that was not, everybody was new, and a lot of folks wouldn't think of what was against tradition, actually, to name your kid after yourself. So I guess it's bad luck, you don't name the kid. But since I was involved in refugee resettlement, it was really interesting for me to find out that welcoming the stranger is like the #1 commandment in the Torah. I think it's said 36 times. It's said more than any other do or don't. And so we do. We need to get out there and be welcoming. So our congregation's pretty small, but I think Will had asked me how many times has our community done refugee resettlement, and I'm aware of at least 5 families through the years. The first was Vietnamese, then Cambodian, then Russian, then Somali, then Afghan. So, in the end, it was like, 5 or 10 people who really put the time in, the resources, the money, the initial setup of the volunteers. So and we're going to be, the Jewish New Year is next week, and we're going to do another recruitment to help some of the Afghan FI.
Well, as far as the Muslim faith is concerned, it's really imperative upon us to support all of our community members and anyone in need, and travelers in particular. Of course, that includes newcomers. There's actually a hadith of the Prophet, which is a saying of the Prophet, peace be upon him, that if your neighbor is hungry, then you cannot eat yourself until you fulfill that need. So the newcomers are our newest neighbors, right? So we do need to support them. And even beyond that, we as Muslims believe that we have to answer for every moment of our lifetime. And if we are doing service or any type of work with good intention and the hope of a good outcome, we will be rewarded for that. So it's really imperative that we get out there and do service. And that's the kind of physical aspect of it, but then there's also a monetary portion to it where we have an obligatory form of charity that we have to give a certain amount each year and throughout the year. So that is definitely something that can be used towards refugees. And then beyond the obligatory part of the charity, there's also a highly recommended, not a specific amount, but a highly recommended optional form of financial support for anyone in need. So with that being said, with those foundations of welcoming and supporting financially, and in every aspect, the religion really does give us an opportunity to work in this realm. So very blessed to be a part of that, and I think it's very similar to the Christian faith and the Jewish faith. I mean, we have a lot of similarities. So.
Yeah. Just to say, I think the discussion last night was our speaker went through and talked about some Old Testament, some points as well as New Testament things. So I think I'm letting you all fill in the gaps from the Christian side, some of the themes. I'm assuming that you were awake yesterday evening and paid attention as well. So you've already talked a little bit about what that has looked like in a local context, and so I wonder to get to this question of newcomer work as a point of interfaith collaboration. I think it's one of the most beautiful experiences for me in working with Reestablish Richmond. As a non-religious entity, we are able to quite freely partner with a lot of different backgrounds. And I have my Master of Divinity with a certificate in interreligious dialogue, so selfishly I really love when we get together on an interfaith perspective. And so I want to ask a 2-part question of where have you seen this community work as a point of collaboration, and what does that look like in terms of bringing people together from different faiths and different backgrounds? And then the flip side of that, because it's not always rosy and wonderful, what are some of the challenges that come within that of having different faith groups who are all collaboratively working together towards welcome? Those simple questions for us to ruminate on. So, where have you seen it be a point of connection, and what has that experience been like, and then what are some of the challenges that come within that as well? And maybe I'll actually start off and and speak to one point that folks don't all, you can think about, oh, well, we have a newcomer group here, and we have the mosque here, and the synagogue here, and the church here, and other faith centers here, and we can work kind of directly there, or we can say, we can work. But without recognizing that many of the newcomers, most are people of faith, and are not always of the same faith as us, and even if they are the same faith as us, they're of a different expression of that faith. And so recognizing that inherent, even if you're just doing it one way and not a collaborative street, this will always be a point of interfaith collaboration. And there are beauties and challenges that come with that. So that's one thought. Hopefully it springboards into your own thoughts as well.
Okay, well, back in the day when I was working in refugee resettlement, we would always try to connect the incoming family with their faith community. So we had reached out to the Islamic when we started working with the Iraqi refugees in the 80s and developed wonderful relationships with members there. And those relationships continue even after the protests died. And in Bonnier, multicultural, not so multicultural Bonnier, we have an interfaith trialogue once a year. And at our last trialogue, I pitched the idea of us helping an SIV family, and folks from all faith traditions signed up, and then I have dropped the ball. And so I am waiting for, after our Rosh Hashanah services, to try to see if I can get, to see what the underlying support is, to get once a tri-faith sponsorship going. But of course, any joint venture means that you have folks with different points of view of how long do you support the family, how enabling you are, and those have to be negotiated no matter what faith tradition you're in, because some folks are more, let them be independent, and some are more hovering.
I think what I can add to that is that I think the interfaith portion of the work that goes into supporting refugees pretty much starts immediately, because the organizations like IRC or CCC, they do have people from different faiths working for them. So it pretty much starts immediately, and I think that's one of the blessings of being here in the United States, because we do have so many faiths that come together and work together on so many different aspects. And then, of course, one of them being refugee resettlement. And then, as Marilyn mentioned, I mean, as I said earlier, I just got into this about a decade ago. But Marilyn just mentioned something about the 80s, right? So this work has been going on for a long, long time, and hopefully it will continue. So I guess one of the shortfalls that I can think of is possibly not having lack of knowledge of the culture or the religion of a particular refugee. That's where we kind of work together to see, hey, this person is coming in from this country, they follow this faith, what would be the best way to orient them and support them? And we all do come together and help each other. And I think Reestablish Richmond is a big part of that, really bringing all the agencies together and making sure that we can do our best to support the refugees.
Yeah, it's beautiful work to be able to see folks come together. I wondered, Aaliyah, you particularly, we have folks who are coming from a lot of Muslim backgrounds, a lot of diverse Muslim backgrounds, and it's always an interesting. I lived in Austria. So I went from being a Baptist in Virginia, which is nothing to sneeze at, to a Baptist in Catholic Austria, which is something to sneeze at. And the difference, right, when you go from being in a majority context into a minority context, even among a similar faith. And so I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what are there challenges within that or what does that look like maybe in practice of having a lot of Muslim folks from a variety of backgrounds that are all, because of being a smaller group in Virginia, are all in contact with each other. I'm sure that there are beauties and challenges that come alongside that, and I'd be intrigued to hear that.
Yeah, absolutely. There are definitely challenges, and again, as somebody mentioned, you know, refugees come in with a certain degree of trauma as well. So that's just another layer of difficulty that they're dealing with. And then I think the cultural shock is probably the biggest thing. Again, I was born here, so I didn't experience that cultural shock myself, but I can say as a child growing up, things seemed very different once I was outside of the house, and then things seemed very different inside of the house. So, you know, just navigating that playing field of kind of immersing yourself in this new culture, but still holding on to the roots of your religion, I think that can be quite challenging. So at the Islamic Center, I think one of our goals is to introduce newcomers, if they're interested, to the local mosques, to the local Muslim organizations, to restaurants that serve halal food if they want to eat halal, or in certain circumstances kosher. For example, there are certain restaurants that, you know, will serve kosher. So, and also grocery stores that will sell those type of items. So there are so many different layers to coming into a new country, especially kind of a country like the U.S. where we have so many different cultures and religions together, working together, living together. It is a beautiful thing, but it can be challenging at times as well. So that, off the top of my head, that's what I can think of. I don't know if Marilyn, do you want to?
Yeah, we don't think about grocery stores. We think, oh, well, go to Food Line, and that's it. So,
No, one of my favorite, they used to have refugee conferences before, even before Trump. But somebody, I think, submitted an alcohol bill, and they all ended all conferences. I don't know, it was ridiculous. But anyway, and somebody had a really cool way of helping a job applicant deal with employers. It's like how to avoid a handshake, and because you're not supposed to be touching someone's, who's of a different sex. And so these were all wonderful cross-cultural trainings that we got to participate in. You just reach your hand out with your business card and you can avoid shaking it. So,
yeah. All right, well, we have 9 minutes before we wrap up, and I want to make sure if you all have any questions, to ask any questions from the audience. I will grab our live stream mic. So any questions? Ben, I expected you to have one.
Talking about trauma and thinking about the religious experiences of newcomers, one of the things that's kind of occurred to me, and this is a thought that is forming, but I grew up in the evangelical tradition, and we talk about deconstructing our faith, which basically means something like I was raised with a set of beliefs about God and about my faith and how I should live, that as I've matured, I realize, oh, well, that's just what people were telling me. That's not necessarily what my faith believes. And it's things that we add on. And I'm thinking about the experience of Afghan refugees, and I don't know a lot of them, but so many of them have had experiences with the Taliban. And so I wonder, particularly from your perspective as a Muslim woman, what it might be like for people who have experienced, I guess I would say, religious trauma due to their experience with repression in the Taliban. How does coming to America affect them? What are you guys observing in terms of your interactions with Afghan refugees?
Just a small question.
Do you want me to go ahead and, yeah, okay. So I think the Afghan refugee, I refer to it as a crisis, because just the way they came in, it was very, very different from the regular process of refugees or newcomers coming in to different localities. It was, gosh, I guess haphazard, kind of. They didn't have the opportunity to go to any other place. Usually there's, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe there are like camps set up in different countries where they would actually stay for a number of years. I've heard like 5 years, and they get their health screenings, they get cultural orientation, security screenings, so on and so forth. But the Afghan refugees came in directly from Afghanistan to America. And then they also didn't come together as family units, a lot of them. So that was very traumatic because they were in hopes of bringing in the rest of their families who were still kind of trapped there or in difficulty. So I know something that was done here. I actually wanted to mention it earlier as well. There was a special, at least I know of a couple of sessions that were done through Reestablish Richmond, specifically for the Afghan women, to deal with the trauma of the change in government, the loss of life. Many of them had experienced their fathers, their brothers, their children being killed or hurt, you know, with the various wars in Afghanistan through the decades. So there were layer upon layer of trauma that they had to deal with, and I remember that I worked with Reestablished at that time to kind of support that, and one thing that we were able to do, I had a personal contact who was of Afghan background, and she was also a psychiatrist. So, you know, Kate brought her in, and they were these workshops set up. I think that was, I'm hopeful that that was very helpful, at least during that initial phase. And then one other thing that they didn't really get when they came in was something that is so, so crucial for refugees, I think, is cultural awareness classes. They didn't get any of that, and I think Reestablish played a big role with that as well, not just for the women, but for the men and the children, to try to fill that gap, which Reestablish does on so many instances. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think to build off of that, I think, you know, we have a very individualistic understanding of faith, Catholicism, but Protestantism as a whole. And I think for many folks coming in, faith is a familial, it is completely intertwined with family, with culture. And so I think in my experience, I've seen a lot of folks not cling to their faith, but go to their faith as a point of strength and as a point of reinforcing connection with that community that is their primary avenue for healing from trauma, right, and doing it in a collective sense. That I think has been really beautiful. And I'm sure in 20 years, sociologists are going to be studying and seeing the effect of displacement on you know, the faith of Afghans or other refugees in the U.S. But I think at the moment what we see is not necessarily any sort of sliding away or wanting to distance. I think there's an understanding that was not right, and as we practice as a family and continue, that this is important. Is that accurate? Would you say?
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely.
Yeah. All right, probably maybe one more question if we've got it. Anyone have a question for the group? You sure?
Yeah.
So thank you for the work that you've done and continue to do, empowering migrants find their way in this new space. So what inspired you, like when you interacted with migrants? Because we sometimes think about migrants as only vulnerable, but also they like as people who muster power. What is something that surprised you or inspired you as you were working with them?
Marilyn, do you want to?
I am over and over again impressed with the resiliency identity, their family, their home, their expected life, and yet they dig in and they make the most of it. And I guess that's, our American tradition is, we're gonna pull together what we have and work hard for our children. And there's just a lot of grace and dignity in the people we've worked with. And they may be an illiterate peasant farmer from, some rural village, or they may have been a former colonel, and yet they all kind of say, okay, I'm not where I thought I was, and yet the vast majority really do more than survive. And I went to a mental health conference and heard about, of course, folks who are dealing with trauma and mental health interventions and this and that. And I said, in Richmond, we've been really lucky. And I think the comment was, well, you're very pragmatic. You take care of their foundational needs, and you say, okay, go at it. And folks, when most people manage to sort of, without a lot of coddling, to show their strengths. We try to build on their strengths. That's social work 101. Is build on people's strengths, and they've got it. Most people have.
Yeah, and I think their resilience is a very, very, it's something that's inspirational. You see it over and over again with the different sets of newcomers that have come in. I think the community also finds the space to support them, to help them kind of find their aspirations and their dreams and help those things come true. And a couple of things, examples that come to mind are, I remember a lady from Iraq who I think had a beauty parlor in Iraq. And when she came here, she wanted to kind of continue on that path. So within the community, we were kind of encouraging women from our community, hey, does anybody want to get a facial? Because she's doing that at her house. And ultimately, she ended up opening up her salon here in Richmond as well. So that was really nice to see. And then with the Afghan community, I think one of the great examples that we have here, it's a restaurant called Montu. I don't know if you've heard of it, but the owner of that restaurant was a refugee from Afghanistan, and he came and he worked with the different organizations, he worked with community members, and he ultimately was able to open up his own restaurant. And I believe that the work he did in Afghanistan was he cooked for the U.S. Army and higher ups, I believe. So he was a cook there, he brought that skill here with him, and ultimately he was able to fulfill his dream of having a restaurant of his own and being the chef there. So that was wonderful. Also, I think just respecting what the refugees or the newcomers feel comfortable with. I remember the Islamic Center wanting to support the Ukrainian refugees. And I remember reaching out to someone. There was an event at Commonwealth Catholic Charities where all of the different organizations were, and I believe it may have been the Jewish Foundation. I can't remember what organization was really supporting them. And I went up to the director and I said, hey, the Islamic Center has, we've been talking about this. They want to support the Ukrainian refugees. It's very unfortunate with what's going on. And her response was that, they are pretty well taken care of thus far, but ultimately their goal is that they want to go back. They don't want to stay here. So they're not trying to create, permanent roots here. This is temporary, and, so they don't need too much support right now. And that was something I hadn't heard before from, a newcomer, but it was good to hear that. It was good to hear that they had a desire that they didn't want to stay, they wanted to go back home, and we had to respect that and honor that, so, yeah.
Excellent.
Mhm.
Well, thank you both so much. We appreciate, I appreciate deeply who you are as people. And thank you for giving your time this afternoon to share both with the folks here and the online people who are real people. Excellent. Well, if give our panelists one last round of applause. I believe we are wrapped. We've got math, 12 minutes. 12-minute break before we're back in here for our next main keynote session. So thank you all so much. We appreciate it. I'll be at the table. I'm around till dinner tonight. So if you have any questions for me, feel free to reach out.
Sure. Yeah, that's fine. Thank
I don't know,
you.
is my hair still standing? Thank you so much. I need a good feet.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
We had a Vietnamese refugee who said, "Oh, my wife doesn't need to learn English. We're going to go back."
I don't, yeah, that was,
It was like 1977 or something.
All right. So we're gonna. You want to be able to.
Okay, we will flank well.
And I know that's the late afternoon. I have a lot crammed into this talk, so I hope you are well caffeinated. Citizenship and the Book of Life is the title. Crammed with the awesome, fantastical, bizarrely beautiful, and grotesque, the Apocalypse of John presents spectacle upon spectacle to the reader. In Revelation 19, the rider on the white horse with flaming eyes and robes dipped in blood captures the beast with 7 heads and 10 horns and casts it and its false prophet into the lake of fire. Then an angel descends to bind Satan with chains, sealing him in a pit for 1,000 years, the millennium during which Christ reigns. This episode, besides a short summary of Satan's return and final destruction, concludes the warfare, violence, plague, and calamity of the book. After the passing of heaven and earth, into the void descend a new heaven and a new earth, and the city of God, the new Jerusalem. There is then, between the final destruction of Satan and the arrival of the New Jerusalem, a narrative caesura, a loaded pause in the drama and the pageantry. It is like the breathless break in the music at the end of Handel's Hallelujah chorus, separating the busy, interwoven chanting and hymnody, and the final triumphant Hallelujah, sung in unison with a thundering roll of timpani. In the narrative pause of the text, there is no fighting, no singing, no proclamation, no angelic explanation. There is almost no sound and no color except for the awaiting lake of fire that burns with sulfur. But this scene between the struggle and the triumph is itself an awesome spectacle, a spectacle of ultimate, all-encompassing bureaucracy. This is the judgment of the dead, an apocalyptic administrative scene with the supreme bureaucrat seated and ready to process the dead, all the dead who have ever died, whether by land or sea, and great and small, in fame, stature, or age. All the dead stand before the judge waiting to be processed individually, since the judgment rests on one's deeds and listing of one's name in the book of life. Unless this office also operates at a supernatural speed, the wait itself, standing before the throne, would be a punishment. This is the most bureaucratic scene in the New Testament. As a liminal scene between the destruction of Satan and the entrance into the New Jerusalem, it acts as a gateway, both structurally within the narrative and literally as the process through which the dead must go in order to enter the heavenly city or be cast into the lake of fire. But what exactly determines the fate of each of the dead? As is typical with any bureau, the procedure begins with records, a database, so to speak. And Revelation's database consists of books. Books were opened, the text says. The text further reveals that there are 2 types of books: books that record the deeds of the dead, which I will call the Book of Deeds, and the Book of Life. But how do these 2 types of books together determine entry or exclusion? Is an entry in the Book of Life based on deeds? If so, why are both types of books examined at this judgment? How can the 2 work simultaneously? Does the Book of Life overrule the Book of Deeds? Today, I analyze the gatekeeping logics used at the gates of the New Jerusalem, that is, the records of the Book of Deeds and the Book of Life, in conversation with the bureaucratic mechanisms for entry and exclusion in American immigration and naturalization through laws, policies, and documentation. What I present comes from my book, Immigration Apocalypse: How the Book of Revelation Shaped American Immigration. And today's lecture shows the influence of the Book of Revelation on American concepts and requirements for immigration and naturalization, which is sometimes obvious in direct quotations or the use of imagery, or through a shared vocabulary or underlying concepts. But inasmuch as American policies of immigration and naturalization have treated Protestant Christianity as the assumed religious identity of so-called Americans to the exclusion of other groups, it has in basic principle excluded on the same grounds as the judge of revelation, that is, based on Christian religious worship or identity. The laws and policies of the American colonial period have their roots in English law. With regard to citizenship and naturalization, English law until 1350 held that the place of a person's birth determined their allegiance and their citizenship, which was unchangeable. Thus, citizenship rested upon the soil of birthplace and was a matter beyond one's action or choosing. It was determined by destiny. In 1350, it was declared that those born to English parents outside of England would inherit English citizenship and enjoy all the rights of those born on English soil and owed loyalty to the king. Citizenship thus expanded to include, for example, the children of ambassadors born outside England and those born within the king's dominions outside of English land, so that would come to include the American colonies. But these rights remain strictly a matter of birth by soil, one's birthplace, and by blood, one's parentage. So whether by chance or destiny, people found themselves citizens without choosing or earning such rights. In 1610, a foreigner could naturalize by the mere grace and favor of the king. But in that same year, this was restricted by law to be granted only to such as are of the religion now established in the realm, that is, Protestant Anglicanism. Thus, citizenship became possible beyond the chances of destiny and was within one's reach through one's actions, that is, by gaining the special favor of the monarch and by proving one's religion and worship through the sacrament of the Lord's Supper. As the law states, no person or persons of what quality, condition, or place soever, being of the age of 18 years or above, shall be naturalized or restored in blood unless the same person or persons have received the sacrament of the Lord's Supper, and also to take the oath of supremacy and the oath of allegiance in the Parliament House. This explicitly tied citizenship and naturalization beyond soil and blood to the sacrament of communion and Protestantism. Sure. So there we have also sacrament and oath. So since English colonization of America began at the same time, these were the laws in place so that those born to English parents in the colonies were also English citizens. An act passed in 1698 expanded this circle to include persons in English colonies to parents who were not English citizens. This created two huge changes that were symbolic, political, and economic. First, this act claimed American colonial soil as English soil, and American soil could therefore produce English peoples of unchangeable allegiance. America was a land where an alien immigrant population arrived and then could be transformed into an English population and then a distinctly American and quote-unquote native population, as if having lived there always and belonging to the soil. Secondly, this meant that all inheritable wealth, and most significantly American land itself, passed from populations in the colonies of diverse citizenship to English citizens by birth. Both these effects served to erase, on a symbolic and practical level, the history, lives, and land of indigenous peoples. The expansion of destiny-oriented citizenship by birthplace to include the colonies was an expansion of imperial territory. In 1709, Queen Anne further increased the possibilities of naturalization for foreigners by allowing German Protestant refugees to naturalize, many of whom then sailed for America to settle ultimately in Pennsylvania. The Foreign Protestants Naturalization Act required only that the foreigner take an oath and the Lord's Supper. These two rites of naturalization, the oath and the Lord's Supper, were kept as key elements in a law passed in 1740, which came to be known as the Plantation Act. The 1740 Plantation Act made it possible for aliens to naturalize in American colonies if they had resided there for 7 years, swore an oath, and took the Lord's Supper. The law also allowed concessions for Quakers and Jews who were not required to say the phrase, "upon the true faith of a Christian," in the oath, and they did not have to take the sacrament. So the requirement that one confess Protestant Christianity was a consistent theme in colonial laws for entry and naturalization. Another consistent theme was the requirement for official record keeping in a list or book. Massachusetts colony laws required a perfect list or certificate showing every passenger arriving on a vessel and a record in the council books for all foreign Protestants sworn in by oath. The Plantation Act of 1740 likewise required that all who are naturalized in America have their names registered in a book or books to be had and kept for that purpose in said office for public view and inspection as occasion shall require. The writing of names in these books for entry and inclusion consistently rested on the same facts of destiny, one's birthplace or bloodline, jus soli or jus sanguinis, or deeds, one's spoken oath and sacramental worship. That naturalization should occur at all and by one's own actions presented a fundamental shift from common law before the 14th century, allowing factors beyond birthplace to determine citizenship. The Plantation Act of 1740 thus allowed entry into the Book of American Citizenry, not only for those fated from birth to be citizens, but also those who had merited their inclusion by their deeds, by oath, sacrament, and residence in the land. At the same time as the 1740 Plantation Act, American colonials were also obsessing about whether their name might be recorded in another book of citizenry, the Book of Life. In the electric atmosphere of the Great Awakening and in the decades of its aftermath, numerous men and women had terrifying visions where they encountered both Satan and Jesus, where they beheld their own names written in Revelation's Book of Life. In 1742, in Lebanon, Connecticut, 2 children, a girl and a boy, saw a shared vision wherein they both arrived at the heavenly city. The boy stated that Jesus met him inside the city and showed him the Book of Life, while the girl recounted that she saw the boy reading a book, quote, bigger than any book they had ever seen in the world, on which in golden capitals were listed the names of the saints. In the Boston Evening Post ran an account in March of that same year of a servant or enslaved girl who saw a vision in which she descended into hell and was rescued by Christ, who took her by the hand, led her out, and carried her up to heaven and showed her the Book of Life, where she saw a great many names, among which were her mistresses, and that the book wanted but 2 inches to be filled up. And Christ told her, if the good work which was carrying on upon earth succeeded, he should come to judgment in a short time. While the many accounts of the Book of Life visions come from up and down the New England coastline, from Massachusetts, Connecticut, New Hampshire, and Maine, similar visions occurred in Nova Scotia, upstate New York, Kentucky, and Ohio. The Book of Life visions that began during the Great Awakening endured for decades in places far from New England, such as among the New Lights Baptists of the Carolinas backcountry in the 1760s. These visions were often met with disbelief. You'll see that in the newspaper article at the end. Criticism also was provoked amongst church leaders, and many viewed them as deluded claims of divine knowledge received directly from Christ. But what was more disturbing to religious leaders was the implied theology of visions of the Book of Life. Protestant denominations in 18th century America, whether congregational or Anglican or Baptist, held to a doctrine of election. That is, the belief that God chooses only some people and not others for salvation and eternal life, without regard to their actions. So given the doctrine of election, an aspect of the doctrine of predestination, the idea that someone could receive a divine guarantee of one's election was considered arrogant at best or verging on the blasphemous. These individual announcements of registration into the Book of Life seemed highly unorthodox and threatening to church order. Furthermore, there appeared in some of these visions the existence of blank pages in Revelation's Book of Life, pages yet to be filled. The girl of the Boston Evening Post account is said that the book wanted but 2 inches to be filled up, and that Christ told her if the good work which was carrying on upon earth succeeded, he should come to judgment. And according to the boy and girl who had shared a vision, the day of judgment was coming soon because, quote, the book of life was filled up, wanting about 1 page. And when that was filled up, the day of judgment was to come. These unwritten pages in the book of life signified not only an imminent day of judgment, but also that names were continuously being added to the book, which contradicted the doctrine of predestination. The ongoing addition of names hinted that human action was at least partly responsible for inclusion on that list. This notion is further emphasized by exhortation of the visions instructing people to carry on with the good work. This idea went against the Orthodox Protestant teaching of salvation by God's election and implied instead that salvation was possible through human action or merit. Thus, while the pathway to citizenship expanded in the American colonies beyond the destinies of birthplace and blood, so also the citizenship registry of the New Jerusalem expanded in charismatic revivalist understanding to include souls beyond those elected and predestined for eternal life. This is not to say that these expansions directly influenced each other, but they reflect a similar and simultaneous shift in thinking and belief, while using closely related vocabularies of destiny and merit containing similar contradictions. That is, both colonial, civic, and religious belonging continue to uphold the principles of doctrine of fate, birthplace, parentage, election, and predestination, but also began to allow inclusions by deeds, oaths, sacrament, worship, and catechism. So, of course, it would be anachronistic to categorize colonial naturalization and Protestant Christian salvation as separately as civil and religious transformations. To be a naturalized citizen in the colonies was to be a Protestant Christian. One had to perform the rite of the Lord's Supper and to swear one's Christian faith, just as one had to perform almost identical rites, usually with the addition of baptism, for Christian conversion. So just as these actions did not eradicate the notion that citizenship, whether earthly or heavenly, was also conferred by circumstances of fate, nor did the idea of an innate essential belonging by birth, blood, and election fade away. These ideas endured in spite of a contradiction. In fact, they proved to be as enduring as bedrock, as I will discuss in a moment. So on a practical level for colonies and their churches, however, the principle of unchangeable allegiance to one's birthplace was not going to encourage immigration or help grow the labor force, which would help expand colonial territory. And in the same way, the doctrine of election was not a real selling point in increasing church participation and expanding congregations. So in practical terms, to increase populations in both church and state, belonging by predestination and fate had to be expanded so that it included belonging through deeds in order to grow the population. Contradictions be damned. So thus, American ideas and policies of citizenship and belonging grew along with contradictory trajectories of predestination and action, fate, and deeds. You can be fated to belong in America or heaven and also earn it through oaths and confessions. The entry procedures and databases of the Book of Revelation itself also operate in the same contradictory fashion. The ancient text and its representation of heavenly citizenship and belonging present the same fundamental contradictions and hidden logics crisscrossing centuries of American naturalization and immigration. Revelation's Book of Deeds and Book of Life are just two of many kinds of texts mentioned by the book. Revelation is crowded with mentions of other texts, including letters to the 7 churches, a sealed scroll, an edible scroll, the books of judgment, and even a reference to itself as a text, along with the curse against those who might dare to change it. These texts, like the throne room and the armies of God, present an apocalyptic version of imperial power, reflecting and amplifying the reach, might, and mechanisms of empire for rule and administration on a divine and eschatological level. The scroll sealed with 7 scrolls functions like an imperial decree in Rome, but on an omnipotent scale, so that when Christ the Lamb unseals it, its mere opening calls forth emissaries to enact God's will immediately. Likewise, the books consulted at the judgment of the dead in Revelation 21 function in ways similar to imperial registries and lists, as do the heavenly books of other Jewish apocalypses, some from which Revelation takes its inspiration. The heavenly books of judgment, like the lists of empires and governments, demonstrate and execute the power of bureaucracy, namely, the power to surveil, gather data, maintain records, to enforce procedures, and to hide the logic behind such operations. The celestial bureaucracy of Revelation had, by the time of the establishment of the United States, been a part of the conception and implementation of earthly governments for centuries. In the ancient text of Revelation, in the history of its interpretation, and even today, in jokes, television, novels, and comics, there is the repeated trope of celestial bureaucracy. And one major feature of this bureaucracy trope is the combination and conflation of ministry and mystery. That is, the existence of hierarchical, data-laden bureaucracy, so think of eternal file cabinets that you see in jokes, right? And it also exerts and exhibits its power by its very mysteriousness. So in Revelation, the nature and function of the Book of Life shows exactly this combination of ministry and mystery. In Revelation, John the narrator highlights the Book of Life throughout the text as both a threat and a promise. The Book of Life is a comprehensive database, and its effects are absolute in the most apocalyptic sense. But the details of how it works remains unclear. The first mention of the Book of Life occurs in the letter to the church of Sardis, dictated by the Son of Man. He says, "If you conquer, you will be clothed like them, the worthy, in white robes, and I will not blot out your name out of the Book of Life." So it appears that entries in this registry are not necessarily permanent, that their continued listing depends on behavior, on conquering, which in the context of the letter seems to mean obedience and repentance. If erasure is a threat, how did the names appear in the Book of Life in the first place? So allusion to the time of their registration is made in Revelation 13, when the beast has risen from the sea and has been given authority to rule. The text reads, "And all the inhabitants of the earth will worship the beast, everyone whose name has not been written from the foundation of the world in the book of life of the Lamb that was slaughtered." And again, in Revelation 17, an angel tells the narrator that the inhabitants of the earth whose names have not been written in the book of life from the foundation of the world will be amazed when they see the beast, because it was and is not and is to come. These verses also show that worship and obedience determine whether one's name is written in the book of life or not. Those who worship the beast are those whose names have not been written in the book of life. But the record of one's name also appears to be a matter of destiny. Names that are not in the book have not been there from the foundation of the world. This is stated twice. But the registry of names as predestined is potentially contradicted by the warning that one's name can also be blotted out of the book of life if one does not obey, repent, and conquer. The narrative does not further clarify how stable the records are. If one's name is not in the book of life from the foundation of the world, will that name never appear there? This information is not given. But since names may still be blotted out, it seems that inclusion in the registry is predetermined, whereas exclusion from it is not. In summary, the main elements of the book of life in Revelation are as follows. It is a list of names, like an ancient citizenship list. It has existed since the beginning, the foundation of the world, and so implies predestination. But the threat of erasure from this book is used to compel allegiance and obedience. The logic of the list remains obscure. It's a mystery. The function of the book of life is further complicated by the appearance of other books at the judgment of the dead, where these books are consulted together. The text reads, "And I saw the dead, great and small, standing before the throne, and books were opened. Also another book was opened, the book of life. And the dead were judged according to their works, as recorded in the books. And anyone whose name was not found in the book of life was thrown into the lake of fire." The book, or books of deeds, are therefore not a list of names but of actions by individuals. Ancient texts that can be compared with the Heavenly Book of Deeds are not citizenship lists, but things like military diplomas that prove an earned citizenship, or records of a ruler's deeds that are carved in inscriptions or recorded in literary works. So if then the Book of Deeds is a record of an individual's works, how does it operate in conjunction with the Book of Life, a destiny-determining list of names? On the one hand, the judgment of Revelation relies on a cumulative record that requires evaluation, the Book of Deeds. On the other hand, that same book seems irrelevant in the presence of the Book of Life, an absolute list in which names either appear or not, effecting immediate and absolute judgment. Maybe the Book of Deeds only records a person's sins, which can result in erasure from the Book of Life, but the text doesn't tell us this. Regardless, nowhere does the text of Revelation say that one can be added to the Book of Life, only that one can be blotted out from it, and therefore also blotted out as a living being. Therefore, every citizen of the New Jerusalem has been predestined for the city from the foundation of the world. This heavenly bureaucracy operates both through the mystery of fate and the ministry of records, wielding the threat of administrative omniscience and surveillance. The contradictory cooperation of fate and deeds, of election and works, as shown in these heavenly books, has, of course, been a source of confusion and theological debate for centuries. The mystery and ministry of ancient heavenly citizenship records themselves are a reflection of procedures and practices of their own historical, political, and governmental context. And these are echoed in American colonial laws as they expanded to include additional pathways to naturalization through oath and sacrament, thus supplementing the tradition of jus soli by soil and jus sanguinis by blood. So the Plantation Act of 1740 allowed for citizenship to be acquired by both destiny and deeds, by birth and by worship, just as the religious revival visions of the 1740s allowed for both a predetermined heavenly book of life and the ongoing addition of names to that book. So while these American phenomena seem to expand the possibilities of belonging beyond predestination and the luck of birth and parentage, certain aspects of destiny remained assumed and unstated in the law of the colonies. What is not spelled out, but assumed in the 1740 Plantation Act, was being practiced in violent acts on plantations, on the bodies of black enslaved peoples who could take no oath or sacrament to naturalize and gain citizenship. In the same year of 1740, the South Carolina colony passed the Negro Act, declaring, quote, all Negroes and Indians, mulattoes or mestizos, and all their issue and offspring to be absolute slaves, that is, property without the right to raise food, travel alone, learn to write, or earn money. This legislation was the culmination of centuries of slave laws and practices in England and the colonies. There was no question of citizenship or naturalization for black or indigenous peoples, regardless of how laws were changing in order to increase the population of the colonies. In American colonial law, black and indigenous people did not belong in the earthly book of life, which functioned alongside the expanding book of deeds offering new paths to citizenship. That is to say, the American Book of Life was not a book of fated enrollment based solely on birth and parentage, but rather on white birth and parentage. The American Book of Life, in reality, was a book of white life. And as in the book of Revelation, if one's name was not in the book of white life, this omission would always trump the book of deeds. No black or indigenous person in America, up through the Revolution and for decades thereafter, could swear an oath or take a sacrament to naturalize. They were not in the book of white life, which had been written at the foundation of the American world. The South Carolina Negro Act in 1740 rested on the ideas circulated previously in the Fundamental Constitutions of Carolina, a document signed in 1699 by 8 proprietors of the Carolina colony. One important feature of the document is its religious toleration in order to attract settlers to the colony. A key section of the document states, religion ought to alter nothing in any man's civil estate or right, which seems to promise religious freedom. But the full text reveals that this precursor to the U.S. separation of church and state also provides the justification of the continued Christian enslavement of people. The full argument of this section reads, "Since charity obliges us to wish well to the souls of men, of all men, and religion ought to alter nothing in any man's civil estate or right, it shall be lawful for slaves as well as others to enter themselves and be of what church or profession any of them shall think best, and thereof be as fully members as any free man. But yet no slave shall hereby be exempted from that civil dominion his master hath over him, but be in all other things in the same state and condition he was before." This law cut the connection between civic and religious inclusion in the guise of religious freedom, so that an enslaved person could not, upon baptism or taking the sacrament, become a free person or a naturalized citizen. The racialized enslavement of black bodies could be justified within the realm of civic identity, separate now from a religious realm, and regardless of the spiritual status of black people's souls. Thus, an enslaved person could take the sacrament as a Christian, yet be unable to fulfill the requirements for naturalization because the law declared citizenship possible only for white people. By the 17th and 18th centuries, Europeans had classified enslaved African peoples as non-white, while Europeans themselves had become racialized as white. How these racial categories should relate to religious belief and identity became a fraught question given the desire of American colonists to maintain black enslavement and disenfranchisement. In answer, the fundamental Constitution of Carolina and other later legal and religious opinions explicitly separated off religion from racial civic identity, latching onto this conceived separation of spiritual from the physical. Thus, a black person's Christian conversion and taking of the sacrament would only bring the salvation of their souls, while their bodies remained ineligible for citizenship and rights. Cotton Mather's 1706 pamphlet, The Negro Christianized, spelled this out as he encourages masters to evangelize those they have enslaved. He wrote, "The greatest kindness that can be done to any man is to make a Christian of him. Your Negroes are immediately raised unto an astonishing felicity when you have Christianized them. Though they remain your servants, yet they are to become the children of God. Though they are to enjoy no earthly goods, but the small allowance that your justice and bounty shall see proper for them, yet they are become heirs of God and joint heirs of the Lord Jesus Christ." Mather shows exactly how disconnected an enslaved person's civic rights were from their spiritual rights. On the one hand, they are chattel, mere property. On the other, they are children of God. Under colonial law, they cannot own goods, but under heavenly inheritance law, they are royal heirs. In this passage, Mather uses the inheritance language from Paul's letter to the Romans. He says, Paul writes, "You did not receive a spirit of slavery to fall back into fear, but you have received a spirit of adoption. When we cry, Abba, Father, it is that very spirit bearing witness with our spirit that we are children of God, and if children, then heirs, heirs of God, and joint heirs with Christ. If in fact we suffer with him, so that we may also be glorified with him." Mather uses Paul's distinction between slaves who are unable to inherit and adoptees who can to draw a firm line between the enslaved people's earthly status and their spiritual status. In Mather's teaching, as in Paul's, an enslaved person's earthly status is the reality of the present time, but this will be changed in the future. They are to become the children of God at the apocalypse of God, when creation shall be renewed and the children of God glorified. This argument is in keeping with the doctrine of Cotton Mather's father, Increase Mather. Increase Mather, in his essay, The New Jerusalem, states that the Book of Life has, quote, "names written in it as in a great city. There is a book wherein the names of those that are free men, that are denizens of the city, are registered." But this heavenly register does not grant freedom to the enslaved living on earth, which he says remains a valley, a vale of tears, even though the people suffering in that vale belong to this future city of God. So also, his son Cotton Mather understood the present reality as separate from what glories and freedoms might come with future citizenship in the heavenly city. Mather, in fact, states that there are two books of life: the book of life temporal for the earth and civic status, and the book of life eternal for the New Jerusalem in heaven. Mather sees the status of one's earthly life governed by the book of life temporal, as born on the skin of the enslaved, further separating the identity of an enslaved body from the inner mind or spirit that can be saved. In The Negro Christianized, Mather writes that they have been scorched by the sun, scorched and blackened by the sun of Africa, are able to have their minds healed by the more benign beams of the sun of righteousness. And this duality writes racialization on the skin, so that the body and its markings belong in the realm of the state, and the salvation and freedom of the soul can only be realized in heaven. This duality, when enshrined in legal opinion, made it possible to baptize enslaved people without freeing them. And thus, missionary activities in Africa, in the Caribbean, and other places in the global south would continue without threatening the slave trade. And this evangelization of so-called heathens could serve as justification for colonization which could then continue to send enslaved peoples to America and to Europe. Thus, while the naturalization process of colonial America retained up until the Revolution the swearing of a Christian oath and the taking of the sacrament, there emerged during this period two books of life: the book of life bearing the names of those who worshiped Christ and would be admitted in the end times to the heavenly New Jerusalem, and the book of white life, written from the foundation of America, bearing only those names destined by body and blood to be white enough to have citizenship in the earthly New Jerusalem of the United States. The definition of whiteness would expand and contract with a little flexibility, but the one unquestioned identity in American citizenship and naturalization and enfranchisement then as now is that of the white male English Protestant. After the Revolutionary War and the establishment of the United States, the unquestioned baseline national identity remained that of the white male English Protestant. This is apparent in the debates leading up to the Naturalization Act of 1790, the first federal naturalization law in the U.S. The opening debate in Congress before the passage of the bill revolved around many issues, but nobody questioned the racial identity of those who could be naturalized, which of course was all free white persons. The US government at the founding of the nation based citizenship on the luck or fate of being born white. In Revelation's terms, the American Book of Life, the citizenship registry based on destiny, was the Book of White Life written at the foundation of the American world. Thus, in 1790, there was no debate as to who could hold citizenship. That was obviously the white man. The real debate in Congress leading up to the passage of the first Naturalization Act focused on what requirements could be set to guarantee such white persons be upstanding and meriting naturalization. In terms of Revelation, the Book of White Life had already been written. The task before Congress was to compose the Book of Deeds, what actions would demonstrate that a free white person was, in Congress's words, good, reputable, worthy, useful, honorable, and having that zest for pure republicanism. In Congress's view, a probationary period of mandatory residence would prove that worthiness. So the nation's leaders saw the need for greater rates of immigration and naturalization since they had, quote, a large tract of people, a country to people, and wished to increase the wealth and strength of the community. The country's leaders therefore aimed to pass laws that would encourage immigration and promote the freedom of the United States. Congressman John Page, actually of Virginia, proclaimed in congressional debate, the policy of European nations and states respecting naturalization did not apply to the situation of the United States. Bigotry and superstition or deep-rooted prejudice against the government, laws, religions, or manners of neighboring nations had a weight in that policy which cannot exist here, where a more liberal system ought to prevail. I think we shall be inconsistent with ourselves if, after boasting of having opened an asylum for the oppressed of all nations and established a government which is the admiration of the world, we make the terms of admission restrictive. It is nothing to us whether Jews or Roman Catholics settle amongst us, whether subjects of kings or citizens of free states wish to reside in the United States. They will find it in their interest to be good citizens, and neither their religious nor political opinions can injure us if we have good laws well executed. These admirable sentiments against bigotry cast the United States as a nation that had advanced beyond the old superstition of European nations. They also opened the category of free white persons to Jews, who could already naturalize under English colonial law, and Catholics, who generally could not. The inclusion of Catholics expanded the parameters of naturalization, who under prior English law in the colonies could not have taken the Protestant sacrament. But the description of the United States as an asylum for the oppressed of all nations because of its immigration policy, however, was and is a moral grandstanding fiction. Immigration and naturalization laws serve ultimately to create the ideal population as understood by those who set policy and legislate. In the Americas, observed Argentine intellectual Juan Bautista Alberdi, to govern is to populate. And in the 20th century, after waves of immigration restrictions, this saying was modified to state, to govern is to populate well. For the first Congress of the United States, to populate well meant peopling the land quickly with persons racialized as white. The construct of white could include Jews and Catholics for the sake of expediency in peopling the land rapidly with a minimally acceptable population. This rapid populating of the land with white bodies would also achieve the aim of pushing indigenous peoples out of U.S. claimed territories, which were certainly not lying vacant, but rather home and ancestral lands of Native peoples. For this reason also, the U.S. government conceptualized jus soli, the right to citizenship by birthplace, as applicable only to free white persons, thus denying, ironically, citizenship to Native peoples who had always been born on the land and to enslaved peoples. This limit of jus soli for white persons also transformed the soil of the land so it only created white American citizens. So while the first U.S. federal naturalization acts were far more liberal than any naturalization laws in Europe, the aim was not righteous liberalism. No, the aim was to people the nation quickly with people of the same racial identity as the ruling class. The growth of this racial population and their settlement on the land would help guarantee continued white governance and further establish their belonging to the land. You might ask, how could a nation founded on democratic principles of self-rule and equality of the people so thoroughly exclude and exploit those who were not white? Conventional wisdom, invested in the essential goodness of America and its founding ideals, would answer that the shining foundation of the United States was only flawed by the racism characteristic of its time, and that eventually justice and democracy would or will win the day as the nation left behind outdated racist notions. Critical scholars, however, disagree and argue that racism is built into the very ideas and structures of the nation-state and American democracy. Anthony Marks argues, citizenship is a key institutional mechanism for establishing boundaries of inclusion and exclusion in the nation-state. But by specifying to whom citizenship applies, states also define those outside the community of citizens, who then live within the state as objects of domination. Nationhood was institutionalized on the basis of race. The political production of race and the political production of nationhood were linked. The formation of the citizenry can exclude along lines other than race, but that was not the case for the United States. The U.S. began as a colonial commercial enterprise over and against indigenous peoples and requiring the labor of black peoples as property. Thus, Matthew Fry Jacobson writes, whiteness was tacitly but irretrievably written into Republican ideology as well. The new democratic order would require of its participants a remarkable degree of self-possession, a condition already denied literally to Africans in slavery and figuratively to all non-white or heathen peoples. Fitness of self-government was a racial attribute whose outer property was whiteness. The idea that the United States could be founded as a nation at all assumed the right of white colonizers to seize the land from Native people and work it with the enslaved Black people population. The country was not founded on a social contract of all people, but rather on a contract agreed to by a ruling group that was defined by its exclusion of others who were not free, not white. So Charles Mills observed, American citizenship and personhood have overtly or tacitly been defined as white, so that the role of the state becomes the maintenance of the official sub-personhood of non-whites. This dynamic is reflected in the upholding of two creeds at the founding of the US and throughout its history. One is the creed of universalistic, egalitarian, achievement-oriented, and democratic norms and values, and the other is a racial creed, which stressed the separation of races and the inferiority of the non-white. These two creeds neatly reflect the dynamics I've outlined in the discussion of the Book of Deeds and the Book of Life. The American liberal egalitarian creed declares that the actions of all people are included in the Book of Deeds so that they might merit and earn inclusion and participation in America, the New Jerusalem. But the American racial creed declares that this applies only to those already registered in the Book of White Life as a result of chance or fate or mysterious divine predestination. Like the Book of Life in Revelation, the Book of White Life can be altered or modified within certain parameters. The names may have been written in it at the foundation of the world, but this does not guarantee their permanence in the registry, since they may be blotted out. In U.S. immigration history, the category of citizen, beyond the unquestioned inclusion of those who are white, Northern European, Protestant, came to include two further categories that might be labeled legally white and another labeled sometimes permissible. In apocalyptic terms, the first category, that of the legally white, is included in the Book of White Life, but their belonging is complicated by difficulties in the Book of Deeds. The category legally white includes some identities the US government categorized as white in a legal sense from the founding of the nation. For example, the status of European Jews and Catholics was included in the first congressional debate, as we've read, about immigration, which concluded with legislation that declared them eligible for citizenship and necessary for populating the land. Their inclusion in the Book of White Life did not, however, mean their admittance to the US was always unrestricted or that their social cultural acceptance in America was guaranteed. Prejudice and suspicion often targeted Jews, Irish, and Southern and Eastern Europeans as especially diseased, resistant to assimilation. It must be noted that the racialization of Jewish peoples remains highly unstable in the US, where they continue to be persecuted in anti-Semitic hate acts and a primary target for white supremacist groups. The second category, sometimes permissible, is included in the Book of White Life when it is expedient to US foreign policy or to mitigate labor shortages. Sometimes permissible identities, unlike those of the first category, have not become racialized as white and can be easily blotted out. This category includes whole swaths of Black and brown people from the global South, Black, Asian, Middle Eastern, African, Oceanic, Aboriginal, Indigenous. Time does not permit me to go over all the moments in US history in which white peoples were supposedly, or non-white peoples were supposedly written into the Book of Life and then blotted out from it, or when they were subjected to an ever-growing Book of Deeds filled with the actions necessary to qualify for entry in America, the New Jerusalem. But I will highlight just a few in closing, and these include the promise of naturalization and citizenship to Black peoples in 1870, subsequently blotted out by Jim Crow laws and segregation and continued disenfranchisement through gerrymandering and voting restrictions, combined with everyday violence and murder by law enforcement continuing to the present. The employment and exploitation of Chinese workers in the building of the Transcontinental Railroad, then subsequent mob violence against them, denial of their right to naturalization, and then with the granting of birthright citizenship, the erasure of communities by forbidding Chinese women to immigrate, combined with anti-miscegenation laws. followed by Chinese and then Asian exclusion laws. This was followed by Japanese internment, and now the resurgence of AAPI hate and the current resurrection of foreign land laws and the conflation of Asian Americans with Asian nations and foreign threat. The seizing of Mexican territory in the U.S. war against Mexico, followed by the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo that seemed to promise Mexicans on said territories the right to U.S. citizenship, only to have such claims denied on the ground, the employment and exploitation of Mexican workers, followed by creation of documentation to restrict immigration, leading to the construction of undocumented as an identity, ultimately creating the identity of the illegal alien tied to peoples who are actually native to the land. And now there is the grouping together of peoples from Central and South America with Mexicans to form the American construct of the illegal person, who have been denied asylum at the border, the walls and gates of America, the New Jerusalem. We now see every day people being blotted out of the American Book of Life, which had seemed to promise entry, asylum, opportunity, and growth. And instead, everything today goes back to the American Book of White Life. The American Book of Deeds has been all but burned in the fires because no matter what papers or qualifications or even citizenship you might hold, if you do not belong to the Book of White Life, you can be blotted out, flown to a strange land, put in a cage, taken from your family, or shot at an intersection. The truth of the American Book of White Life is now clearer than ever, and it has existed since the foundation of this nation. Thank you for listening. I look forward to your thoughts and questions.
Thank you so much, Professor Lin, for this wonderful presentation. I have questions, but if I want to open it up for others first. Chris.
Professor Lin, I just want to thank you so much for the presentation once again. You know, your presentation had my mind firing away, but one of the things I thought about was the resistance within black churches in particular, thinking of, and just black religious identity, particularly in the 20th century, with this whole notion of you know, a pie in the sky theology and saying I don't want to wait until I die to get you know what God has for me, and I've often wondered. Now your presentation in particular has me wondering if that's part of like the ways in which black folks have been like blotted out from this book, is like refusing to like accept the terms and conditions that white supremacy offers them, and saying no, like we know that's not what God has for us. We know that's not what it means to be American, and to be such staunch defenders of democracy and staunch defenders of what it truly means to be American, in spite of never being able to fully participate in that reality. And so I just would love to hear your thoughts on that in terms of like how you interpret the resistance of black folks and other minoritized identities, and how that's participated in like sort of the blotting out.
Yeah, I think that's a great comment and observation. I think the refusal to accept this separation, right, of what we can hope for eschatologically and what can be realized on earth is the foundation of black theology, right, for the 20th century and before that as well, right? So, of course, in the 19th century and 18th century, when we do have interpreters of scripture and preachers and teachers that are refusing this separation, right, because they see very clearly that intended dualism happening, right? This separation of, even of like academic practice or theologizing that has no association with what's happening on the ground. There's a wholesale rejection of that because it's a lived experience, right, to understand that duality. So that's a great observation. Yeah.
Thank you so much for the interesting
I don't think
lecture.
that's actually on. Oh, it does. Okay, sorry. If you could just speak louder for my sake, yeah.
Speak louder. Okay. So I see the apocalyptic narratives, including the Book of Life, draw their power from the fear of exclusion. So I saw the fear and scary thing has something to do with the politics. But how can we overcome the language of the fearful language in a way that reclaims in a message of the hopeful message?
Okay, so how do we overcome the fear and threat that we see in Revelation to read Revelation in a different way that's hopeful? Is that the basic question? I mean, I think we do have to acknowledge, right, that threat is there. And there's a lot of threats present through the violent imagery and through the language and through the instructions to the churches and the commands, even the curse of, do not change anything in this book or remove anything from it. You will not be written in the book or you'll be blotted out of the Lamb's Book of Life. I do think, yes, there is hope and a promise of refuge, a promise of comfort also at the end of the book. So I think both things exist in tandem, but unfortunately they're both there, right, within the book. And I think it depends on what we do as ethical interpreters of that book that matter, to acknowledge what is there, but also to interpret it in a way or to use it in a way that in action and in teaching that would look for ethical and just practices. That helps.
Others? Questions?
Thank you so much. I had no idea where you were going at the beginning of this paper and where you got. It was fascinating, just sort of looking at the history of these two books and the way that they interact in contemporary culture. I was wondering if you encountered an understanding of the way that the vision of the Book of Life as providing access to heaven for blacks and brown folk. When does this begin to allow them access to the same heaven as whites versus access to another point of servitude?
Yes. So it was interesting when I did the study on the book in ways that American political discourse has used Revelation to talk about immigrants. Black populations in the US weren't talked about in the same way as those who are coming from Southern Europe or those coming from South America or coming from Asia, because there was an embeddedness, right, of enslaved black people already within the population that understood it. So it wasn't so easy to use that particular metaphor of, all of these people trying to come to the US as, acceptable populations for the, city of God, or as those to be excluded. Those were pretty easy to see with populations like the Chinese or populations that were seen as diseased or unwanted in other groups. What was fascinating, though, is the little tidbits I did find of what would be the status of black people in heaven. A few places where you have the preaching or the writing that they would be in a segregated part of the New Jerusalem, right? Or that they would be able to see their former mistresses and masters through a hole in the wall, like different imaginations of what that would be, but maintaining a separation. So there was the inclusion of that in that vision, and this was wholesale rejected by the people, the black communities to which this was taught, and so this was, they understood this as complete bunk, and so that was, but the narrative is, the metaphor works differently, I would say, with enslaved black populations that were needed to undergird American establishment as versus those seen as coming in from outside, if that makes sense. Yeah.
And it almost seems as though the notion of blackness is something that's a soul concern,
Yeah.
ontological concern that shapes every aspect of being perpetual.
Yeah, I mean, and that renders the Mathers argument completely ridiculous, because if you still have the exact same status in heaven, then what's the point of having, like, you're just basically a continuation of what you're talking about now. So they can't even imagine something that is not like what they think should be. Yeah.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So one of the things I appreciate about your presentation is also so looking at the roots of how the discourse between Revelation and also the discourse of who's in and who's out but also with this last slide and your last piece, that these processes of exclusion continues to manifest themselves in new ways and various ways. So I really appreciated that. My question is kind of like in the same train as Subin's question. So is there any kind of like imagining preachers or teachers of the Book of Revelation within a religious context, and they want to inspire people with like to deconstruct how it was abused in some way? Are there other like places like the anti-imperial discourse, for example, that creates anti-imperial discourse within Revelation that may create a discrepancy between how it is appropriated? I'm not asking for like doctoring the Book of Revelation to make it look good, but is there like some sort of tension or discrepancy between how it has been misused in a particular way and some of the tendencies within the book itself as anti-imperial, if that is how you would read the book?
Yeah, so I think there are possibilities, right? Revelation is a book of multiple infinite interpretive possibilities, and so you can take it in many different ways, and people have. And so I think there are notes of hope and there are notes of counterpoint, right? In which we have, one, the use of this in or out absolutism that we find in Revelation in a very stark and pretty easy way, I think, for American politics, as it has been. But you'll find minority voices who will give a counterpoint. And two that come to mind, I'm blanking on their names right now, but they were two black women preachers in the 19th century who took and had their own visions of what this would be like, of their being clothed and accepted into the crowd and them leading forth into the congregation in an apocalyptic vision that uses the same visions and same imagery. So I think that that's a powerful counter narrative to what, the way that it's been spun in American political discourse, and especially by people I think who are the most downtrodden in American history and understanding themselves empowered by their own vision that also uses this imagery from Revelation and apocalyptic. So, yeah.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments?
Thank you. That was really interesting. So one of the things that one of the things that's always interested me is the different ways in which my native country of South Africa and the United States have happened to be racist. And one of the things that's interesting is when it comes to slavery and Christianity in South Africa, the rule was almost the opposite, equally problematic, because there, if you became a Christian, you had to be freed. So they prevented the enslaved from becoming Christian. There were some who did become Christian, and they also had to meet some literacy tests. I do wonder to what extent these different practices end up feeding into racial constructions. I don't expect you to necessarily have a theory on that, but it does seem that the way they then space out about what is the relationship of Christianity to the concept of enslavement and the political situation, how that then feeds into later constructions of race.
That is
not a question, just an interesting thing.
That is really interesting, and I would like to look more into that. But it shows the underlying understanding that what slavery is absolutely not squaring up with what Christian teaching and doctrine should be. Because there's a consciousness of it that forces the separation of these identities, right? In either the American way or the South African way, right? And so it's like an implicit acknowledgement of that while denying it all the time, right? And saying, well, you're doing so much that's benevolent, but then why do we even have this separation? It's an obvious admission, right? That is just one of the most horrible things. An interesting other case that is comparable to the Americas, where you say, this is thinking of a different country, but very similar to the United States in its birthright citizenship history and the peopling of the land, is Australia. And of course the Americas, because it's understood in the European mind as blank. It's a tabula rasa, right? Australia, Americas, they are similar in the ways they approach these things, because to the European mind, they're just blank slates to be filled. So their citizenship laws have a history that are very different from European because of the way it's conceived in that way. So it's interesting to compare, right, the different notions of slavery, religion, citizenship, naturalization along those trajectories. Yeah. Cool.
In my sanctified imagination, I wonder what it would look like if the roles were reversed. As if the people of color were the ones who were in the land already and others came and they rejected them from the get-go. Just in my mind, what a wonderful world.
What would the world look like if the people who were of color who were in the land rejected those who came? I don't know. But it would be interesting to think of. I mean, there is rejection, right, on some level already of the indigenous peoples, but then we have the introduction of diseases and of weapons, right, and so, and it's not universal, the rejection, right, and acceptance, depending on what tribe, what nation is seeing. But the great irony, of course, is that was the first great wave of immigration, is the white colonists arriving on the soil. So, yeah.
It almost seems as though, however, that wouldn't work because it's the person, the group that wields God that has the ability to define. Mm-hmm. So God becomes the means for facilitating everything from citizenship to identity to racial definition. So you would have to say they would have to control the God that everyone understands in order for it to happen. So I mean, which gets back to this larger issue of the way that religion works to perpetuate these racial categories, as you were talking about, and the way that it changes. One of the things that you said a second ago was that that South Africa just did not allow people to be converted initially. That was actually true in the U.S. too. And it was, you talk about Cotton Mather, it was the Great Awakening that sort of changes that.
Yeah.
Because prior to that, blacks just didn't have souls. They weren't accepted. And then it becomes an issue. The Baptists and Methodists are able to move people forward to conversion, but then they have to limit this. This is where this compromise comes in.
Yeah.
They have to be able to limit what will happen as a result. Oh, well, you won't really be free, but you'll have salvation somehow.
Yeah. And I think tied up in all of this is this theological concept of chosenness, right? And that becomes highly problematic when any one group just decides we are, right, and has that certainty. And so, of course, those who are Cotton Mather and, his forebears and everybody else coming into the colonies understood and built their understanding of what this land was on Hebrew Bible stories, New Testament stories, right, in which it is the errand to the wilderness, it's the spying out of the land, it is the encampment, of Israel, and then on top of that, we also have the New Jerusalem, of course, in the streets of heaven. And so it's using, I say semi-jokingly that it's live action role-playing the biblical text onto this new world, right? And so it's their chance to act out in real time, right, their theology and understanding of who they are. And that becomes deadly in so many different ways. And wherever who's wielding God, as you've said, is the way to enact that at justification all along, yeah.
Would you join me again thanking Dr.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I believe according to the schedule, we have a little bit of a break and then dinner in Holderness. Is it also 6:15 or a little earlier?
So the break, feel free to go to the lower lemon or if you wish to call basically level where there's refreshment there. And then the dinner starts at 6:15 in Holderness.
6:15? Yes. Yeah, so 6:15 dinner in Holderness. And those watching live stream, sorry you can't join us in person. Well, thank you all.
Yeah, thank you. No, I did that like